Today's youth need teachers, volunteers, and most of all, well, they need you. I'm Doug Edwards, and I'm going to be talking with real youth mentors and students to give you the knowledge you need to be the best youth worker possible. This is Youth Worker on Fire. Hi, Youth Worker Nation. This is Doug Edwards with Youth Worker on Fire. Today I have a couple that you are going to want to listen to. We have some parents here that were also missionaries at one time to Russia. We're going to talk a little bit about that. There's a book I'm going to start you off right at the top. You are not alone. I don't know if you guys can zoom into that. There you go. And so you can look for that online. Amazon, where can we get this?
Amazon, Barnes & Noble, through our website at hopeforhurtingparents.com or anywhere.
Okay, all right. So you've got that. We have Dena and Tom Yohe. And I think I pronounced it right this time.
You did, you got it.
Lots of people pronounce it lots of ways. Yohe.
Yes.
And I met their daughter first. I met their daughter about 6 years ago, 5 or 6 years ago, it might have been, when she was at Youth Pastors Summit over at Universal Studios. The movement she was promoting was to write love on her arms. Is that right? Is that the name of it?
That's right.
And a movement that I understand is in over 100 countries now. It was because a friend started that for their daughter. Their background, as much as I know, is that they were here in the States, went through some things with Renee, thought everything was okay, and then they ended up being missionaries in Russia for a few years, and then found out there was some deeper issues there.
Yes.
And so there's a lot of people that are hurting in this world, parents especially, most of them silently or behind closed doors, broken marriages, broken homes as a result, broken siblings. And I want us to cover a little bit about that today as well. But I've given you a little bit of their background. They're in Orlando, by the way, East Orlando, near UCF. We talked about that. University of Central Florida, for those of you who have no idea where we are. They're going to tell us a little bit, catch us up to date. What's happening now?
Well, right now, Renee's doing very well. She's probably as healthy as she's been physically, emotionally, spiritually, mentally, and we're very, very happy to see that. And we are continuing to pursue our work with parents. We come alongside parents and bringing encouragement to them, trying to bring hope, and just helping them to know that they're not alone in this journey, because we often isolate through this, as you mentioned.
Yeah, and we isolate also because most people don't understand that there's a lot of people going through this, because we always end up first talking to the people that don't understand and have a lot of suggestions of why we're doing things wrong, right?
Yes, definitely.
That's always the case.
Yes.
And so when I'm sure you have people that approach you that because of what you're going through, they're going, we're going through that too. We didn't know who to talk to.
Yes.
So, Dena, go ahead.
Yes, there's a lot of guilt and shame. It's a huge problem because we are embarrassed about what's going on. We don't want anyone to know. We want to protect our own reputation because, like we did when our kids were younger and we thought we knew how to do this thing called parenting perfectly, like you do A plus B and you get C, and we learn that that is not true. There's no formula. But we hide because we might be looked down on, like we did others, wondering, what did you do wrong? What did you not do enough of or too much of? And then we didn't want them to think badly of our daughter. So that's another reason people hide. They're going to get over this. This is temporary. We need to not let people know because we don't want them to ostracize them as well.
Exactly. Yeah. Let's go into a little bit of your background, then we're going to definitely cover more of that. Because the one question I always ask on Youth Worker on Fire is, during your adolescence, who is that one person that just stands out that just kind of influenced you?
Well, while I grew up in the church, I wasn't really very involved. I didn't know Christ personally at the time. So for me, it wasn't until college when I discovered who Jesus really was and that he was what I was looking for. Midway through my college years, I transferred to a small Christian college. And it was there that I got to know a dynamic man and wife. He was one of my professors who had been a missionary overseas, and his heart was just to pour into his students. And he was amazing. He impacted me, he and his wife, because of how they lived out their faith in such a real way and how they really cared about me. And they had one of the biggest impacts, and still have a relationship with his wife in her 90s today.
Oh, wow. Wow.
And for me, it's also in college because high school was more, it was fun and games and stuff. I didn't take much serious, then. But then I came to Christ after high school. And the person who led me to Christ was very fundamental in my growth. And he was the one who was also then got me into the small college, helped endorse me and sponsor me. But several of the professors at this college, because it was small, they really poured themselves into the students. It wasn't a huge college where you're just a number.
Yeah.
And it really made a huge impact on me.
Now, what did you guys do before you did the mission thing? Were you doing something else?
We were in pastoral ministry
Oh, you were?
for
Okay.
17 years.
Okay.
And so our kids are PKs and MKs. So,
Okay. All right. So they need therapy anyway. Okay.
yes, they
Yes.
do. Yes, they do.
Two areas of challenge.
PKs,
Yes.
obviously. Right. No, I'm joking about that. But there is a lot of stress and strain people don't understand on missionaries' kids and pastors' kids. It's a whole nother dimension of life, and you're not your own.
Expectations.
Yeah. People
Yeah.
expect a lot. My kids got out easy because of youth pastor. I've stayed there. That was my calling. And they didn't know what it was to move.
Great.
Oh, my.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
stayed in one place,
That's great.
all their life until they got married, and they didn't know. And plus, we did a lot of things with students, so therefore their friends were always welcome, and didn't have certain ones of those pressures. Plus, we came from Youth for Christ and campus life, which taught us to be real community people, and it was a different dynamic. But what pastors' kids go through, missionaries' kids, just a fishbowl. People are like looking in at you all the time and judging.
Yeah.
Doesn't go well for teenagers.
Yeah.
It's hard.
And it was hard when these things started happening with Renee to go to work every day. We were at Campus Crusade at the time. And, the friends that we had, they're talking about their kids graduating, what colleges they're going to.
Mission
and we're
trips.
thinking about, what treatment center are we going to find? And that's not a very good conversation.
Talk about hiding with
Subject.
guilt and shame.
Yeah.
We didn't know anyone whose kids were going through anything like we were.
Yeah.
So there was no one safe to talk to that could handle our trials.
Great word. There was no one safe to talk to. And that is an issue. It's a
Yeah.
major issue.
It's huge.
So, but once the cat was out of the bag, once people started knowing, then you found that there were people that came out of the woodwork that said, oh, we're dealing with the same thing. We were afraid, but we want you to know, right?
Yeah. I mean, we actually lost friends. The person I thought was my closest friend pulled away. It hurt so badly. She just couldn't be there in the pain with me. Unknown to me, she had some issues going on in her own life, and this was just one more thing she couldn't do. 10 years later, she did ask me to forgive her. But it still was a very huge pain for me. But yes, God brought other people along who, when our story became public, as it did with the Tourette Love on Her Arm story, and it was out there, and I had the freedom then even more so to talk to people, as I began to be honest and real with what I was going through, yes, people would come to me and say, oh my gosh, I had no idea, but I'm so glad because I'm going through something similar. So God brought many others who could walk with me in deeper, more meaningful relationships today than I had back then. So,
Yes. And let's do this. Tell them the scenario or the time frame that you guys went through of discovery, 12 years old, 17, and then counseling, because I listened, I read some of those things. They need to hear that.
Well, as you mentioned, we first discovered Renee cut herself at age 12, and we were so clueless. I mean, this was quite a while back.
18 years ago.
We had never heard of it. We couldn't understand it. There's nothing we could put our minds around to get a hold of this. And so we didn't even know what to do. Just don't do this again, please,
Right.
And then she didn't for quite a while. But then when we went overseas, we actually went over 2 different times. And during the second time, we found out, she told us, she said, I'm cutting again. I'm very depressed. I'm suicidal. And we spent a long, long night, all night, talking with her and deciding we needed to come back to the States.
Yeah. Now, Russia is not an easy place to be, by the way. I've been to Russia.
Yeah.
Quite a harsh environment. I don't know what all you guys are dealing with there. But when you came back for counseling, you found out some other things.
Right.
Give us that story.
Well, first of all, in our naive state, we thought that all we had to do is come back to America, find a counselor, and she'd be fine. Yes. The counselor really shocked us when she said, I think Renee needs to be evaluated by a psychiatrist. And we're like, what? What? I remember still making that phone call, just shaking. I couldn't believe that something could be wrong with my daughter. Yes, and then when we had the evaluation, found out she had a number of mental health issues. And it's been up and down and back and forth over the years about that, bipolar anxiety disorder. But that was a huge eye-opener that day. We had no idea how serious her challenges were. And the three of us can still remember sitting in his office, Renee's 17, and he says, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being suicidal, very suicidal, and 10 being, you're just fine, no problems. She's a 1 or a 2. It's a miracle she's still alive. And our world just crashed down. Then it's shift into panic mode. How do we save her? How do we fix her? How do we change her? What do we do? And we're a mess. And we weren't thinking about ourselves at all. It was just all Renee, Renee, Renee. How do we save Renee? It was a nightmare.
Well, and let's get detailed about the nightmare just a little bit. And that is, youth workers need to know this. Tell them the discoveries that happen from the sports incident and then the overnight with a friend and what happened. I mean, we're talking insult to injury.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, she was in high school. She had just made the soccer team, and in fact was moved up to varsity. And she met another girl athlete who played softball, and they hit it off. And one weekend, she asked if she could spend the night with this friend. And we talked to the parents. We did our due diligence to find out more about them. Things looked great. What we didn't know is they had moved from another town to get away from a toxic boyfriend. That boyfriend came over in the middle of the night, and the girl snuck out. And Renee got drunk for the first time, and drunk to the point of passing out. And then, as she divulged to us later, that she believes she was raped at that time.
That set her on a downward path from that point on. Now, the mental health issues were a complicating factor. They didn't help at all and certainly complicated everything. But yes, that really caused her to hate herself even more and not care about how much she destroyed herself. But she's a very compassionate young lady who had had a very vibrant, strong relationship with the Lord. And so she loved us very much and didn't want to hurt us. So she tried very hard to keep all of these things hidden from us. So she did not get the help that she needed because by the time she really remembered what had happened, she never really let on, and that continued to cause more pain. So the hiding and the not knowing just causes more destruction.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Tom.
Well, and we contacted the police, we contacted the parents. We pursued this as far as we could.
When we knew something had happened, but didn't really know for sure.
And one of the woman police officer met with Renee one-on-one and talked to her about the seriousness of what you can get into with alcohol and just all that had happened. And we had hoped that message would have reached her, but it really didn't.
And then the difficulty in those situations with moving forward legal is it's he said, she said.
Right,
and
right.
So
too much distance, too much time.
And months later, So, very, very
legal system
sad.
is a very difficult thing when it comes to what's happened to your child, and there's a brutality about going through it. So not only do we shy away from going to psychologists and psychiatrists, we shy away from going to law enforcement.
Oh, yes.
A lot of times because it can backfire on you. And we love our law enforcement people. We love, they've got to we've got to have them. We need those guys. But their hands are tied with certain things too because of legalities. And I had a lawyer friend of mine who was a very wise man. And he said, Doug, the things that you think are right are probably not legally right. Think the opposite of what you think is right, and that's probably legal.
Wow.
I mean, that was an eye opener for me early on, and we were dealing with different situations. So you're dealing with this.
Well, yeah, and then later on, as the years went by, and she became addicted to drugs and alcohol, and that became more of an issue, those kinds of things happened to her even more. And each time the guilt would just overwhelm, she would brutally cut herself and end up in the hospital, the psych ward. Those would usually end up in her finally consenting to go to rehab. But on the rape issue, years later, when it came to light, what was happening to her, we were so grief-stricken by it, we knew we needed help for ourselves. And while she didn't want help, and at that point she was out on the streets, we sought out and we found a wonderful program in our county, and many cities and counties where these people live may offer something similar. Here it was called the Healing Tree. And they offer help for families whose children have experienced some kind of sexual assault. And at the time, they had a support group led by a therapist for parents. And we went to that every week for a year. And it was so healing, so wonderful. It brought us a long, long way toward healing and forgiveness. And Central Florida has something called the Central Florida Victims Service Program. And they offer free counseling, support groups, legal help for anyone who's experienced something like this, any kind of crime, violent crime against themselves, whether they've been robbed or sexually assaulted.
That's awesome to know, because you know what? Even as someone who tried to help service parents toward things like that, I didn't know about those groups. And groups were hard to find.
They are.
Yeah.
They are.
In fact, during some grief, some death of a student around here, we had a lot at one time. I mean, it was like every year. I mean, once a year, a funeral once a year of a student is a lot.
Oh my!
And we were going through about 5-6 years of once a year we would have to perform a funeral for a student and their family, or a student losing their parent. And so you deal with those griefs, and we had to create our own, and which was only short term, and that was made up of parents who had lost a child. You know, and they came out of the woodwork. We didn't know all of those people, and some of them were friends of ours, and they'd lost young children, so it had been years before, and different things like that. So that is huge, this resources that you just gave us there. Okay,
Good.
Tom, I'm a dad. And I've got a little girl, okay? I've got 3 kids. You guys have 3 kids.
Yes.
You have 2 boys, and then Renee. Is that right?
We have a son.
One boy.
Our older is our son, and the younger is another daughter.
Okay.
Sorry.
And I haven't met I've met the son because of one of my former students, Becky Treen, who's married to him. And but I didn't know about the other daughter, so I apologize for that.
That's all right.
That's all right.
But tell me about being a dad. What some of your personal pains were, because dads were the hardest to break out and actually get help.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the greatest things, I felt like I needed to be the protector, and I wasn't. I wanted to, especially over with my daughters. And so feeling like I didn't protect her was really tough and really hard to hard to let go of. And anger, deep anger, I wish the worst for these guys.
Oh, yeah.
That abused her. One of the things that is interesting, the police shows that I would watch, there's always this scene where the 2 cops are with this bad guy, and the one cop wants to shoot him or something, and the other one's talking him out of it. No, come on, hand him over to a higher authority, hand him over to the law, the system, don't do that. And that parallel helped me, because I could take this person, instead of thinking about my own vengeance upon them, I could turn them over to a higher power. I can turn them over to the authority of God. God's going to deal with that person far better than I can. He knows their story. Who knows what was done to them that caused them to do this to someone else.
Yeah, they just become like a bad guy. There's no story when you're relating to, I didn't protect my daughter, and you did this to my daughter, and we forget that because we can't handle that story.
Yeah.
And by the way, that's okay. That's okay, because at that point, we're dealing with a whole lot more types of issues with ourselves, to where we have to get through those before we could even think that there was another story.
Yeah. Renee had a young counselor that she really, really enjoyed and saw for quite a while. And I remember one time I was so frustrated. I'm not sure how to parent Renee, not sure how to connect with her. And I called the counselor to get advice. And she says, well, Tom, first of all, as a dad, you need to connect to your daughter's heart. And I go, well, good. Tell me how to do that. And she goes, you're an adult. Figure it out.
Was that okay for her to say?
It was. I needed that.
Okay.
I needed that. You know, she wasn't going to enable me. She wasn't going to treat me like a victim or a child. And it was good. And so I tried to find ways where I could just be with Renee. I would listen far more than I would talk. I would ask her questions about her likes, her interests, what she wanted to do, and different things like that. And we began to draw closer. I think it was a very good turning point. Because before, it's every time she's acting out, I'm angry, and I'm bawling her out and I'm telling her what she did wrong and stuff. That gets old for both of us. I needed to break that pattern because it wasn't working. It wasn't doing either of us any good.
Yeah, right.
So
exactly.
It took time and effort, and it took me to get out of my comfort zone, so to speak, to be able to try that.
The music.
The music, oh, yeah. Not my taste in music, but I would listen to her music. Tell me what you like about that.
She needed you to love. I'm an artist, and my parents had to listen to a lot of stuff. And the one thing that you appreciate about parents and about students, those students need your approval. Our children need our approval. And they may need it for the rest of their life. My dad died 2010. He was 80 years old.
Oh.
I still wanted his approval. It's a big deal, and especially at that age. Go ahead, Dean.
I was just going to say, I remember it really touched me because I knew it was really stretching for him, but he would go in a room and sit down on the floor and say, tell me about your favorite song. Play it for me. And she would, and then he'd say, tell me what you like about it. Just talk to me about that. Yeah, that really won her heart, meant a lot. But about anger, anger is a big thing. I found something that I tell about in my book that really helped me, and a lot of parents tell me that they're using it and how powerful they're finding it too. A counselor suggested this to me when I was seeing them about something else. It's called the chair exercise. And what you do is you sit across from a couch, a chair, whatever, and in an attitude of prayer, you pretend that God, or your higher power, as some people want to think, is in that chair. And with no boundaries, no restrictions, you tell him everything you want to say. Just let it rip. Cuss, yell, scream, whatever. Just say it all. Get it out. And then you sit quietly and in an attitude of just listening, say, what do you, God, want to say to me about that? It sounds weird. You just write down what you sense. And the very first time I did that, it was so powerful. And I really sensed what I needed to hear that day, which was that it was okay, that he understood. Because I even thought it was wrong to be mad at God. I'm not supposed to be mad at him. Oh, dear, that's not right. But I am. Okay, and he knows it, so I might as well be honest and tell him. And that was just one way that really helped me that I like to share with other people.
That's a very good point. People need to know that. That is a huge point. People restrict themselves from that, and they pent up so many things. We're either going to let those toxins out, or we're going to keep, and they're toxins, or we're going to keep those toxins in, and they're going to manifest themselves somewhere, physically, mentally, emotionally, something like that.
Yeah, a big way is through depression. When we suppress anger, it often turns into depression.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Years ago, before I had 2 years in Oklahoma, I was at a growing church there. One of the guys' wives, very athletic. She's pregnant and okayed by her doc to play tennis while she's pregnant, and kept that, because if you're already exercising, it's good not bad for the baby, it's good for the baby. And she had an aneurysm and died on the tennis course.
Oh, my.
And it was going to happen. They said, listen, it was going to happen anywhere. It wouldn't matter if it was tennis. She could have been walking down the street. And I remember first time hearing a pastor say, looking at him, he was at church that day, about 1,500 of us. And he looked down at him and he said, Bill, don't let anybody tell you you can't be angry. He said, in fact, if you want us to come and take a ball bat with you to a tree, you want us to be angry with you, we'll do that. And that was freeing.
Yeah.
And it took years later for it to sink in again and to hear that and see that with some other people. But I saw a TEDx talk, and I want to tell you about this, because in your book you talk about one of your friends that said, have you ever thought about thanking God?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
It was-
well, let me tell you what she said, and I'm going to let you tell what you felt.
Okay.
And because youth workers need to hear this. She was at a TED Talk. I don't know if you've ever heard TED Talks before. And I grew to love them.
That's
I saw
powerful.
Rick Warren on there. Rick may be controversial to some, but I loved his ministry. But I saw her, and she was a girl she had shorts on, an attractive young lady, and we found out why she had shorts on. It was intentional, and she was a victim of the Boston Marathon bombing. She had lost a leg. You couldn't tell. She had a prosthetic.
Wow.
And the one thing that she was there to say is, be careful what you say to your friends when they're going through grief
Yep.
and depression. She said, because of what my friend said to me about getting over it and moving on, she said, my best friend is no longer my friend. Not even my friend. And so you went through something similar. Tell that story.
Yeah, at a point in time when Renee was on the streets and we did not know if she was dead or alive, she had relapsed in her addiction. I was really struggling. A lot of grief, sadness, fear. Oh, it was awful. And I was complaining about that one day to a friend at the office. And very nicely, this person, who also had 2 challenging children of his own, said, please don't take this the wrong way, but are you giving thanks? You know that scripture verse, give thanks and all things. Yes, I know. No, I haven't been giving thanks. Now, Doug, as soon as he asked me that question, I wanted to hit him. It just made me angry.
Absolutely.
It was like, how dare you tell me I should be giving thanks? I don't know if my daughter's dead or alive. How can I be thankful? I can't even smile. It feels wrong to laugh. I wish I was dead because it'd be easier.
You had a quote in there about that.
Yeah, give thanks. I didn't tell him this. I just told him no, I wasn't doing it because I'm a nice person. I don't get mad. So I said, I don't know how. I just really don't know how. And very gently, he said, well, I just want to encourage you that it could help. So just pray about it. Just pray. That's all. I said, okay, I can do that. So over a period of time, I gradually started to pray and just simply ask God, okay, I don't know how. I know that the scripture says this, but show me how. Just help me. And it didn't happen quickly. It was a process. But I found that it started slowly with, okay, today I can be thankful that I woke up and got out of bed. Because sometimes you didn't want to do that. The next day it was the sun shining. And so on. I hear a bird singing. I had a delicious piece of dark chocolate. So simple little things. And it gradually grew. And then the day came when I decided to start keeping a gratitude journal and writing. And I still do that today. Something every day I'm grateful for. And it broke something loose in my heart. And it was so surprising. I didn't expect this to be part of my healing at all. But it really shifted in me where I didn't seem to focus as much on the problem and all the unknowns and what I couldn't control. And I focused more on just God, who he was, what he'd already done for me, what he did for me in little ways and big ways every day. So yeah, it was a surprise, but a big piece of my journey.
Yeah, we're going to talk about PTSD, by the way, because you mentioned that in there. And we have in the city right now the traveling Vietnam Wall. like the monument in D.C., but it's a smaller version of it. If you've ever been up there, it's just overwhelming, the names and the length of it, and they have a smaller version, which is still very large. Downtown, you might want to go there before you leave. Yeah. But we think of PTSD, which is a stress disorder, in military people, which is obvious, and many of them should be going through PTSD. And I even have know one that is PTSD is still very much a part of their life, and he wasn't even in a war zone. He's a captain in the Army, but just those different pressures. Tell me what you're saying about PTSD with parents dealing with what you're dealing with.
Well, just I think the simple fact that we are also traumatized by what we go through and experience with our children. Those middle of the night phone calls. I got to where I couldn't hear a phone ringing in the middle of the night. If I did, I went into instant panic and fear and the racing heart. And I just had to, I can't even have the phone in the bedroom anymore. I cannot hear that, or it just wrecks me. Yeah, I think just people don't realize that we do feel the same things. Now, my daughter has experienced it, but yeah, me too. And I need healing from that trauma as well. So we just kind of forget about ourselves. And there's a lot of help out there. A type of counseling that's helping a lot of people is called EMDR. I've written a lot of blogs about it on our website. A lot of Christian counselors are using this. It's basically retraining the brain that you no longer, the triggers don't impact you physically, psychologically anymore the same way, because you're able to connect the feelings with a different memory, and the memory of what you experienced, like maybe finding your child doing something or what have you, doesn't affect you like it did before. But yes, we need help too, and are impacted more than we realize by what we're going through.
And it's ongoing for you, isn't it?
Yeah, you always are concerned about something. Is a relapse going to happen? Is another call going to happen? Another crisis going to happen? It's there in the back of your mind, and it's hard to not have them there. And so sometimes, like, I haven't heard from her, Renee, in several days, or and I'm thinking, what's wrong? What's happening? Is she okay? You just fly back to those memories.
When something like the phrase comes to me, when things like this happen in your life and things weren't that way, they were pretty normal before. The phrase, you're not in Kansas anymore, Dorothy, like in The Wizard of Oz.
Right, exactly.
I mean, and all of a sudden, things will never be the same. You think differently about all of life.
Well, there were certain TV shows I couldn't watch anymore because nearly every one of them deals with some of these topics. A lot of the police shows are always dealing with rape or some sort of sexual assault or addiction, and always making jokes of people drinking or being drunk, and they were not funny anymore. Right. And so those shows would always trigger me. But we're changed. These things do change us. Not all for the bad. We can now say, wow, a lot of good has actually come from it. It's all, each thing individually on its own, like a cake recipe, if you tasted each of the ingredients by themselves, like raw egg or flour, but it tastes awful. But when you put it all together and bake it, then you end up with this delicious product, like a cake, that you can actually enjoy. So all together, they all work together for good for us. And we are finding that. So we're glad to share that there is hope there on the other end.
That's good. And how do we know that we're possibly approaching PTSD, or we got PTSD or something like that? Are there some signs to look for that you guys knew about?
We didn't know about any of them. We were just in it, feeling it, going through it. It was one of the things
How did you find out it was PTSD?
I think it was through talking to counselors that were trying to help her, doing research for other people. So one of the things that we did that helped us with our fear was to educate ourselves as much as we could about the different things that Renee was experiencing and going through and dealing with. And then we would gradually learn about these things. I think the first time we learned probably more about it was when we took a course offered by an organization called NAMI. It's the National Alliance on Mental Illness. They're nationwide, and they are like the I think, prime source of information, education, advocacy. And they offer a free class, 12-week class for parents, or for anyone who has a loved one struggling with a mental illness. And one of them is PTSD. And there we learned a lot more. We are not experts, so I can't give you a lot of details, except that it helped us be much more understanding and empathetic, not only for her and all the other things she was dealing with, but for ourselves, and realizing, oh my gosh, I'm impacted by this too.
Yes, and I'm glad you said that you're not an expert, because, by the way, Youth Worker Nation, most of you aren't either, okay? Don't try to be an expert where you're not an expert. Get some people in your life. In fact, I called one of my buddies, Dr. Gordon Greenhall, last night. I said, hey, here's some things that we're dealing with, and we talked about the sensory thing that she was dealing with. And my wife and I have dealt with some of that, and with other people, some very close issues with us. And people don't know what that is, and they think, oh, you're just being overly dramatic, blah, blah, blah. They're not overly dramatic. Right. It is a real issue. I said, Gordon is, and by the way, he's on one of the sessions. He's a home run hitter when it comes to adolescence. Now, of all the counselors I've known, and I've known a few, sorry guys, but that you're good too. But Gordon's a home run hitter when it comes to adolescence. I've known him since he was since we were in our 20s, and he was dealing with inner city for youth guidance and Youth for Christ, and I was doing campus life, and then he got his master's, and then he got his doctor's degree, and I said, tell me about it. And he said, number one, I'm not an expert there. He said, that's where you go. He said, I am a family therapist. He said, that is where you go to a psychologist and maybe a psychiatrist. And so I appreciate that from him. And just like you're saying, well, I'm not an expert there, we find the people that are. It's better to work with a team. And one thing we talk about in youth ministry and the teaching, you have a principal, you have the school board, you have counselors here, you have all those things so you can teach. And we do the same thing with youth ministry. We either develop a team or we don't, and things work better with a team.
Yeah, we can't know everything. And part of our ministry and on our website is that we help people find resources.
Yes.
We don't know, but here's people who do. And so that's a great resource for you or for any parents that are struggling.
And we're going to say your website several times. So give us your website one more time for those just now listening again.
Tom, why don't you do that?
HopeForHurtingParents.com.
HopeForHurtingParents.com.
And we also have a Facebook page.
Okay, yeah, you're in the social media. There you go. That's good. That's good. Now, what are some things that people are not asking you that you wish that they would ask you so you could tell them?
Not so much asking, perhaps, is just being a very good listener. I often want to fix something. I want to come up with an answer. I want to come up with a solution. I want to give it out to somebody else. And really, I think it's just more important to be a good listener and let the parent or whoever you're talking with just be heard. Because it's so easy to throw out a platitude or put a scripture on it and say, well, this is going to, and it shuts off the person from being able to express things that they probably need to express and get out. So that's huge. And then maybe the question, something we began asking ourselves, because as parents going through it, she's in a different place than I am at a certain point and what have you. We have to navigate those differences. And so we say, what do you need most from me right now? It's a very good question. And they can tell you, I really like A, B, or C, or I just need somebody to listen.
Yeah, don't assume you know.
Yeah.
I think a big thing is also realizing that hurting parents are grieving parents. Their child's still alive, but they feel as though they've died because their hopes and dreams they had for them have died. They've shattered, and now they don't know what's the future holds, what's going to happen. So to treat those parents or grandparents the same as you would someone who has just suffered a loss, a death, because what we needed is the same.
Yeah. And it is a death. Yeah. It is a spiritual death. It's an emotional death. It is almost worse than death.
It felt like it, yes.
I'm reminded.
They're still alive, and
in Genesis, there's a point not too early in the book where it says God was grieved in his heart about man's behavior and was ready to wipe us all out. So that wasn't a death per se, but that was behavioral grief. And that's what a lot of God's weeping or grieving. Jesus wept over Jerusalem. It's behavioral grief. So it's very real.
Yeah, that's true.
I think another thing is on the topic of hope, because
Very good.
it's changed for me. It had always been, hope is having what I want to have happen for my child. My daughter won't get pregnant. Your son won't ever end up in jail or prison. They won't become addicted and have to go to rehab. It's always that they'll be okay, that all these will resolve, but they might not. So what is our hope? What's it in? And I've shifted it to realize my hope has to be in what's sure, what's firm, what's unchanging, and all that is God. It has Psalm 62. Find rest, O my soul, in God alone. My hope comes from Him. It's who He is, His character, what He's already done, what He's promised to do in the future. And so my hope has shifted in that I just trust in God for whatever that He has. I keep my eyes on Him, and I made a long list of, okay, what can I know for sure? If my daughter died tomorrow, what can I stand on? Where do I find strength? And for me, it's been in God's Word. And so I went there and I've looked for every single promise that I knew was unchanging, rock solid. Okay, He's with me. He'll help me. And that was where I've turned, and that's where I put my hope. So parents, that's hard to hear. There's no promises, that there's no guarantees, that, just claim this verse, do this, and everything's going to be fine, because God was the perfect parent. And look what happened to His first two children. He did nothing wrong. He did it all right. He's our example. He understands. He shares our brokenness, but we also share in His great comfort.
Yeah, He gave us free will.
Yes.
Who knows why? I mean,
It was a big risk.
We look at humanity and we go, really? Free will? But let's go to your children, because it's one thing to think about the parents, and we have a tendency to forget our other children's grief because we are so dealing in the moment with that one child. And God, Jesus talks about it, hey, and He gave the example because they were shepherds in the Middle East at that point. Hey, what does the shepherd do? And they all related with this. If one of the lambs or sheep have gotten out of the fold and run away, he leaves, if there's 100, he leaves the 99, and he goes and looks for the one. Tell us about the two, though. Tell us about Renee's brother and sister. What were they going through?
Yeah. Well, Michael's 4 years older than Renee. So when she was in high school, which is where a lot of the worst of this was happening, and right after her graduation, he was in college. Okay. So he wasn't in the house. He would know about it. We would talk to him about it and let him be informed. He would come with us to visit at the treatment centers, the family visits. And so he wasn't in the house. Her sister, April, is 2 years younger. She was in all the midst of it with us. Yeah. And she saw all the drama, all the stuff going on. What we tried to do is we tried to relate it to parts of the body. So like if I broke my arm, and several of my kids had broken arms and then they growing up, I said it's not that part of the body is any more important, but it's hurting, it's broken, it needs attention, it needs extra help. And it's not that we care less for any of the other parts. But right now, and it's temporary, this one gets more attention. We tried to help them see that. But then we also did try to make sure, especially with April, that we went to all her school events, that we attended all her activities. We planned some special things. And we told her, we said, look, we understand that you've been neglected. We understand that you haven't gotten all the attention. This summer, we're going to plan something very special just for you. What can that be? and she wanted to do a fishing trip.
Oh.
And so we were in Colorado for Campus Crusade for our staff conferences. We planned extra days to go up into the Rockies, and we got a fly fisherman to teach us all how to do fly fishing. And we just spent the day fly fishing in the streams. And just give her some extra love, make up for some of the things that she didn't get.
We tried to just pour out a lot of affection, words of praise, letting them know how very much we appreciated them. And they both struggled with difficulty understanding. It was perplexing to them because they didn't struggle with any of the things that she did. So it was hard for both of them to understand or make sense of. So sometimes, a little anger, why, but mostly just a lot of empathy for us, empathy for her. They're both very, very forgiving, very compassionate. So fortunately for our family, there was reconciliation early on, and we didn't experience a lot of the negative things that many other families do, where maybe the sibling stole from them or did a lot to really hurt them and harm them. Renee never did that.
One of the turning points for April and Renee was when Renee was in a treatment center, and we had a weekly family time.
Yes.
And we would come and we would meet with the counselor, all the families first, and then we would go back to the treatment center and meet with the clients, the patients, and Renee. And April brought up her anger, to the counselor, and she goes, "You need to tell Renee. In our main session, I want you to tell her." And she did. And she said, "You made me so angry. I was so mad at you and the way you treat." And Renee says, "April, I did this on purpose. I did not want you to follow in my footsteps. So I tried to do everything I could to make you hate me." And that was a real reconciliation. And they both forgave each other and hugged and embraced. A very moving time. And so the family, we've been very, very fortunate, as Dena said. The family is reconciled. The family is happy to get together.
There was some selflessness on Renee's part.
Yeah, a lot.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because that, I've never heard of an addict or someone going through those things do that on purpose. I mean, she wasn't ready to make that up. She didn't have time.
No.
That had to be a real.
Yeah.
This is what I did, and this is why.
Yeah.
She has always had a very strong love for her family, and never wanted to hurt any of us. And sadly, this is one of the motives that many people take their lives. They have so much guilt over how much they've hurt their families.
Yes.
They don't want to be a burden.
Yeah.
They don't want to hurt them. And oftentimes that is why they take their lives. They really feel like this is the best thing to do for their family.
Yeah, there's some countries. I found out a while back that Japan, suicide is actually, I think, still an acceptable way out of life. It's an honorable way out.
Saving face.
And so when this gets to Japan someday, and it will, realize that's not true. There's a God in heaven that says that you're worth it and that He will work things out no matter what the pain.
Yes.
And you know what? As people have gone through pain, and I've gone through some severe pains in my life, we're not here for that, but we're here for yours, so I can understand some of what you're going through. I cannot understand all of it. It's far beyond the pains that have had to go through. But we have a tendency just to think there is, even though we know that it's okay, we have a tendency to just say, well, when we talked about Job, I believe, can it just be over? Can we just get out of this life? No matter what our belief system is, because the pain is so huge. And once again, this is like a POW in these camps. I'm thinking of that when you were talking about PTSD. We're talking about it's almost a prison sentence for us as parents. And it's a prison sentence. The odd thing is, both the child and the parents are like in separate prisons.
Yeah.
And it's a POW. There is light out here. You've heard of these stories where they hold on through these enormous odds. They should have just killed themselves, died, something, but they had hope. And you talked about hope.
Yeah.
Any last words?
For me, it would be, don't isolate. I think that's what the enemy wants. and the small illustration about the fire, the logs together, the fire burns, you pull a log aside, and it's quickly the fire's going out on that log. And so isolation is not what God intended for us. He never asked us to do that. So fight the urge to isolate, connect with people, save people, and walk through it together.
Absolutely.
Reach out, find help, find a support group, connect with us through our website. We can help you start one even. But that if your child is still breathing, there is still hope.
Wow, great words, great hope for those listening. And Youth Worker Nation, hopefully you're soaking a lot of this in. Don't try to give the answers. There are no good answers when people are in severe pain. There is only caring for them and listening to them. And as they said to April, what would you like to do? That's a great question. What would you like to do? Even to those people going through grief, what would you like for me to do? The answer may be, I don't know. But at least instead of going, well, here's what you should do, and here's what, there is no good thing to say when someone has died. There is no good thing, youth worker. There is no good thing to say to parents who are going through this kind of grief. And if you haven't been through it, your best answer is find the other people in your world and their sphere that have been through what they are going through. They are the only ones who have the right to ask those questions or to lean in and know what to do, because the pain they've experienced it, you don't. So don't try to do what you're not able to do. The best answer is no answer. Sometimes just listening. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time here. And don't forget this book, to order it. And you can go to their website. Give us that website one more time.
HopeForHurtingParents.com.
HopeForHurtingParents.com. Right, we're out, Youth Worker Nation.
You've been listening to the Youth Worker on Fire podcast. If you like what you hear, please subscribe and tell your friends. Also, leave a comment and tell us what you think. Stay tuned for more informative episodes.